Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. We're out here in the vegetable garden today, and we're actually going to be doing a small harvest. But we're not actually going to be harvesting vegetables. You know, my vegetables are really, for the most part, just getting started, and there's not going to be a lot to harvest there for a little while. But what I am going to harvest today is some of my favorite medicinal herbs that we're going to use to make a really easy infused herbal oil and then eventually turn it into a medicinal salve. So one of the first medicinal plants I ever discovered, and actually I think this is the one that really got me into herbal medicine, is this plantain plant here. Now this plant, you'll find this or some variation of this plant really pretty much everywhere. This grows wild all over the place. The kind that most often grows in my area is this broadleaf plantain. I'm going to put the Latin name on the screen for you so that I know sometimes when you use common names it can be a little bit confusing because there are usually multiple plants that go by the same common name. So by knowing the Latin name of plants you can be a lot more specific and know for sure that you have the right one. But you can see this plant here, you can see when you pick it, sometimes there's, I don't know if you can really see that there, little veins that kind of stick out of the leaf. And you'll see it's kind of a wide leaf with veins that run the entire length of the leaf. So I find in my area, this is a pretty recognizable plant, and this is one of my favorite ones. So even though most people would consider this plant a weed, I let it grow in my garden. It grows in the pathways, it doesn't take up any space, it doesn't hurt any of the plants that are growing, and I find it really useful. This is one that I always like to have on hand. So as always, before using any plant as medicine, make sure first of all that you're 100% certain of the identity of the plant. The same applies if you're foraging wild plants that you didn't grow yourself. You want to make 100% sure that you are using the right plant. So you're also going to want to do your own research before using any plant as medicine, because while this herb plantain is considered safe for most people in most circumstances, not every herb is going to be safe for every person, and herbs are going to affect different people differently. You know, our bodies are all different. We're going to process herbs differently. So I'm just sharing what I'm using from my family, but before using any medicinal plant for yourself, you definitely want to make sure you do research. You want to look into the risks and benefits of each plant because, as I said, those may be different for different people. So that's my little disclaimer. So we're just going to go ahead and harvest a handful of plantain leaves. What I'm going to do with these is I'm going to dry them, probably not dry them fully, but dry them enough to just get the bulk of the moisture out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to infuse them into some olive oil. Now you can see I have a lot of wild violets kind of growing intermingled with the plantain. I let those grow in my walkways for the most part too. Now the benefit of infusing an herb like this into olive oil is that it basically preserves its medicinal properties so that you can have easy access to that herb even when it's not in season. You know, in the winter, we may still want some plantain, and at that point there won't be any leaves out in the garden to harvest and use fresh, but I will have the oil that I infuse. So let's talk a little bit about what I use plantain for my family and what you may be interested in looking into for your own family. So plantain has a great ability to pull things out, basically. My first introduction to plantain came when we were at a friend's house, and they had bought this house as a foreclosure. They weren't moved in yet. We were just taking a look at this property. So they weren't living there yet. They didn't have any first aid supplies or anything like that at the house yet. And my son was playing outside in their yard and got stung by a yellow jacket. Now, we didn't have any way to treat that. And I remembered some random article that I had happened to read online shortly before that about how plantain is good for bee stings and wasp stings and things like that. And I was like, well, that's a plant that I can easily identify that grows pretty much everywhere. I figured the chances were pretty good that they probably had some in their yard. So I just went outside and looked around, and of course I did find some because, as I said, it grows pretty much everywhere. And I didn't really know how to go ahead and use it. So I was kind of acting on instinct because, you know, my son had been stung by a yellow jacket. He's really upset. So I took a leaf and chewed it up, and basically I found out later that what I had done was actually make something called a spit poultice. At the time, I was just thinking I just want to mash this up and get the juices to come out. So I just chewed up that leaf and put it on his wasp sting. And it was actually pretty amazing how immediately he felt relief from that. And ever since then, this is actually one of my son's favorite plants because that is one of his earliest memories of it. And so he associates that with the relief from his yellow jacket sting. So when I saw how well that worked, I said, wow, I need to find out more about this plant. So I started looking into it, and as I said, that was probably my first real introduction into herbal medicine. And since then, I have found that there is so much to love about herbal medicine. So that kind of gives you a clue that plantain is really good for a lot of skin ailments. It's great for, as we mentioned, bug bites, bug stings, things like that. It's also good for irritations in your skin. People use it pretty often to help soothe poison ivy. There's a lot of basically skin irritations and rashes. It's really good for that. Now, I have heard people say that they will use it for infection, that it can help draw out an infection. Now, of course, you're not going to want to treat a serious infection with just plantain, but it might be something that you might want to consider adding to your treatment regimen. Also, I know because it has such a strong drawing property, people tend to use it for slivers as well. Chew it up and make a spit poultice the same way. Or if you happen to have an herbal infused oil, you could put that oil, or if you've turned it into a salve, you could put that on the splinter or on the bug bite instead. So what I am planning on doing with this is I am going to dry these out till they're probably not completely dry, but until the bulk of the moisture is out, till they're pretty strongly wilted. And then we're going to infuse them in olive oil. The reason I'm going to dry these out ahead of time is because when you harvest a fresh herb like this, there's so much moisture in the leaf, and what can happen is if you just put it directly into the oil in the state that it's in, you're more likely to have your oil spoil faster, you're more likely to have it get moldy. We obviously want to avoid that. So I'm going to mostly dry this first. Now, just a note about drying herbs. While some people do use a dehydrator for this kind of thing, I actually prefer to air dry my herbs rather than use a dehydrator. Now, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can just lay a paper towel out on your countertop, just lay the leaf out on the countertop or on top of the paper towel, and just let it kind of air dry for probably a couple days or so until most of the moisture is out. So that's a really simple, low-tech way to do it. Also, I do have a hanging herb drying rack, which is really handy. You can lay your herbs out on that screen. If you have a great place outside, which is out of the sun, and a nice area that's going to be reliably dry during the time that you are going to be drying your herbs, that's a great option too. So that is another option. I find that if you use a dehydrator, that obviously that dehydrates using heat, and I find that a lot of the herbs, and the same is true of a lot of culinary herbs too, they're just very delicate plants, and I find that you can damage some of the more delicate constituents of the plants by using that heat from the dehydrator. So for that reason, I like to air dry. If you prefer to use a dehydrator, by all means go ahead and do that. That was fine too. So there is one other herb that I'm planning to harvest and collect today, and that is comfrey. You can see I have a big comfrey plant here. Now it is getting ready to flower, so I prefer to harvest my comfrey leaves for salves before it flowers. So I want to go ahead and harvest a few of these. Now these leaves are so large. You can see we don't need really all that many of these to make a really nice infused oil. So I'm just going to go ahead and collect a couple of these. Now when I dry these, I'm going to go ahead and tear them up into smaller pieces just to help them dry a little bit faster. Now comfrey has a completely different set of medicinal properties than plantain does. It is also a little bit more of a controversial herb, so I'm going to once again stress doing your own research before using it. Now comfrey is known primarily as a healing plant. It does have some great properties that will really help your skin cells regenerate really quickly. It's traditionally been used to heal a lot of things, bruises, sprains. Even back in the day, there's reports of people using it to heal broken bones. So there is a lot that you can do with comfrey. I like to have a comfrey salve made up in my house for, just those kind of minor little injuries that you get. It's really good to help those heal a little more quickly. Now there are a couple cautions with comfrey. You definitely, pretty much all herbalists that I've seen agree that you do not want to use comfrey on a wound that's really deep or on a puncture wound or anything like that, because what can happen is that it can cause the skin on top of the wound to heal so quickly that is healed while the interior of the wound is still not healed, and then that can do things like trap infection, trap dirt, things like that inside your wound and make it take a lot longer to heal. So that is definitely something you want to avoid. Now, herbalists are kind of split on whether you use comfrey on broken skin at all, even if it's a minor a minor cut or an abrasion or something like that. You'll find differing opinions on that, so go ahead and do your own research. But most people do agree that it is a great thing to use on unbroken skin wounds, like bruises, like sprains, sore muscles, things like that. And additionally, it's also really good to use on, say, a cut once the skin has closed over, and just to help it heal a little bit more quickly. So I really do like to have some of this on hand, just because it's just a great treatment for all that kind of stuff. I like to take oil that I've infused with comfrey leaves. I like to add a few essential oils in it that are also supportive for bruise healing. I'll add a little bit of melted beeswax to it to make a salve, and then that is really great to apply on bruises. Or if you bump yourself and you know you're going to get a bruise, if you apply it before you bruise, a lot of times it can prevent a bruise or else lessen the severity of the bruise you'll get. So those are some of the uses that I like to use comfrey. So let's head over to my elderberry guild, and we're going to take a look at some of the comfrey plants I have growing over there, and we're going to grab some leaves from those plants too. All right, so over here in the elderberry guild, you can see I have some comfrey plants that are pretty huge. Now, I just planted this plant last year. Comfrey is a fast grower. So I like to grow comfrey in my garden for a few reasons, one of which is all the medicinal benefits that we were talking about. Comfrey also makes great compost and is really good at accumulating nutrients for your other plants in the garden. I won't go into all that right now, but it's also great at attracting pollinators when it blooms, which it's going to do really soon. I actually think comfrey plants in bloom are really beautiful. So we're just going to go ahead and harvest a couple more of these leaves, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to dry them. So you can see this part of the yard's a little bit shadier. So while this plant is getting buds, it's a little bit behind the one on the other part of the garden. So honestly, I've got, I think, 5 comfrey leaves. Honestly, these leaves are so big that I think this is probably enough to make probably a whole cup of oil salve. Maybe I'll grab another leaf just to be safe, but I think this is going to give us quite a bit. Okay, so we're gonna do an experiment together today. I have this big hanging herb rack here. You can see that it has multiple compartments with a little zipper inside. It's all mesh, and basically it allows you to hang dry lots of herbs at once. So I'm going to do an experiment. As I said, I'm going to try hanging this in my garden from the trellis. So I'm going to choose the back trellis here because that's the shadiest spot of my garden. It gets the least sun, and I think that's most likely going to work the best. I really do love that hanging herb rack. I find it's really convenient, and because it has 6 different levels in it, I could do up to 6 different kinds of herbs at once if I want to, as long as I don't have too much of each herb to fit on one level. So I do really like that, but I have not really tried using it outside before, so that is what the experiment is going to be. I'm not sure how well that's going to work. I'm hoping that it will dry well. So I'm going to give it a try, and I'm going to keep you guys posted. So I'm going to see if I can even hang it from the top of my arch trellis without a ladder or a step stool. We'll see. I'm not the tallest, so we'll see if I can reach it. So, as you just saw, I was not in fact tall enough to do it without a step stool. So I brought that out. I got this hanging here. We're gonna give this a try, and like I said, I'll keep you updated. I think I'm gonna check on this tonight and again tomorrow morning just to see how well these herbs held up, to make sure there wasn't any dew that settled on them. There is no rain in our forecast for the next couple days, so I'm thinking they should be able to be out here long enough to really get dried. But as I said, if I check on them tomorrow morning and they have dew on them, I'm going to move them to the house and dry them in there instead. So on this shelf here, I'm just going to go ahead and lay out the plantain leaves. I'm not even going to bother tearing them because they're pretty small anyway, so they'll dry pretty fast just like that. So we're just going to go ahead and lay those out in a single layer and let them dry. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and zip up our plantain. I think the comfrey might take 2 levels, so these bottom 2 levels here will be comfrey. And because these leaves are so large and have so much more water content, I'm going to tear these up a little bit and just put little pieces of them in here. So we'll just get this all in here and get it drying. Right, so we've got lots of great medicinal herbs drying in this rack. I am going to keep you guys updated about how this rack works outside. And once these are dry enough to infuse into some oil, I'll show you how we do that too. It's super easy, but I'll just show you that process anyway. So if you guys are interested in purchasing a drying rack like this, I can go ahead and link this one or a similar one if I can't find this exact one. I think I just got it on Amazon. So I can link a similar one in the video description if you're interested in that. I do find it really useful, although you certainly don't need a rack like this to dry your herbs. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me in the garden today as we did a little bit of a different type of harvest while we're still waiting for our vegetables to be ready to harvest. We have lots of herbs, lots of perennial herbs that have been ready and waiting. So I think we're going to put those to great use this year. So I hope you guys are having a great day, and I can't wait to see you guys again soon. I'll see you next time.